We're also live on a Life of Hobbies.
Let's see if, how much time is left. Yeah. You remember how I told you these lower sessions?
Look at those empty seats. 5 minutes before tip-off on national television, and the upper bowl looks like a ghost town. This is the Indiana Fever in 2025, and something has gone catastrophically wrong. Remember, this is the same organization that said they wanted to be like Apple, wanted to turn the Fever into a household name. Instead, they're watching their arena empty out despite having the biggest draw in women's basketball history on their roster.
See, everything was fun and games for the Indiana Fever before the start of this season, man. They ended up last season stating that they wanted to be like Apple. They wanted to turn the Fever brand and the Fever organization into a household name. The total opposite happened. The start of this season immensely started off rocky, involving none other than head coach Stephanie White.
That Apple comparison wasn't just marketing talk. The Fever organization made that statement publicly before this season started, setting expectations sky high. They had Caitlin Clark, the most marketable player in WNBA history, coming off a rookie season that shattered attendance records. On paper, this should have been a goldmine. But here's what they didn't account for. You can have the best product in the world, and if management destroys the customer experience, people will walk away.
Now, last year, we was already seeing a downhill spike in the way the fans was feeling about Stephanie White. Now, I'm here to tell you, throughout my times in traveling back and forth to Indianapolis, something I have noticed is that a lot of Caitlin Clark fans has not been going to the games. A lot of Caitlin Clark fans has definitely showed their service and showed their frustrations with the Indiana Fever organization.
Stephanie White. That's the name you keep hearing when Fever fans explain why they're not showing up anymore. The head coach who was supposed to elevate this team has instead become the face of their dysfunction. And this isn't just online noise. When you actually go to Indianapolis, when you talk to people who bought season tickets expecting to watch Caitlin Clark flourish, what you hear is frustration bordering on betrayal. These aren't casual fans complaining about a few losses. These are invested supporters who feel like the organization is actively wasting their investment.
Now, Pacers Entertainment has a very, very, very critical thing to do. They either going to have to lower the ticket prices tremendously, fire Stephanie White, or just free themselves of Caitlin Clark. Because as of right now, we still is about halfway through this season. And if Stephanie White continues to display the type of coaching nightmare she's having, this will bankrupt their entire organization.
3 options. That's what Pacers Entertainment is staring down right now, and none of them are good. Option 1, slash ticket prices dramatically, essentially admitting they've overvalued their product. Option 2, fire Stephanie White mid-season, which creates chaos and admits the hiring was a mistake. Option 3, the nuclear option, part ways with Caitlin Clark and rebuild from scratch. Think about how insane that third option sounds. You have the most popular player in league history, and the situation has deteriorated so badly that some people are actually discussing whether keeping her is worth it if it means keeping this coaching staff.
Now, with that being said, the games has been absolutely boring. And to me, the more Stephanie White talks, it makes this whole situation absolutely worse. Now, this was the scene. Now, I want to give, before we get into this story here, this context, I want to give the biggest shout out to Major Sports Network for doing
bankruptcy. That's not hyperbole. That's a legitimate concern if this trajectory continues. We're halfway through the season, and the coaching has been so poor that it's not just affecting wins and losses anymore, it's affecting the entire business model. When fans stop coming to games featuring Caitlin Clark, you've got a problem that goes way beyond basketball. This is organizational malpractice at a level that threatens the financial viability of the franchise.
They stated this was 5 minutes before tip-off. I took a still picture in real time and a video all the way up to the Raptors, and it panned out. You could see everything. Can you see the clock below in the middle? That's the time left before tip-off, sorry. Now, I do want to say, as someone that has now been to 2 Fever games this season, this is the scene right before tip-off. This right here, a lot of empty seats. But when that clock hit, bro, tip-off, a lot of this bottom section fills up from what I've seen. From twice I've been to the game. So if you guys ain't ever been, you need to not say nothing for real. Because these, like this middle section here, always fills up right at tip-off.
Now here's where it gets interesting. The person who took that video made a critical observation. Yes, those seats are empty 5 minutes before tip-off, but the middle sections do fill up once the game starts. People are in the concourse, getting food, getting drinks, dealing with long lines. That's a fair point. But look at what he's also saying. The upper bowl stays empty the entire game. No question about it, those sections never fill up. And here's what matters. This is someone who's been to multiple Fever games this season. He's not guessing, he's reporting what he's witnessed firsthand. The lower sections behind the Fever bench, those fill up. But you've got massive sections of that arena that remain empty throughout the game, even with Caitlin Clark on the floor. That should be impossible.
It don't matter that it's 5 minutes left. It still could be, 5,000 to 6,000 people in the hallways ordering food, getting liquor and stuff like that because the lines be excessively long. Now, this top section, it's going to stay like this the whole part of the game. Like ain't no doubt about it. It is definitely going to stay like this the whole part of the game. But this middle section definitely is going to be kind of full. Like you might have pockets here and there, like this lower level here with seats, couple seats, but all up in here, because this is where I sit at, right over here behind the Fever bench in section 3 here. But I'm here to tell you, this is bad for the Indiana Fever organization.
National television, Japanese television, live streaming internationally. The Fever are getting unprecedented media coverage, and what's the world seeing? Empty seats. This is the worst possible optics for an organization trying to build a brand. You can't claim you're becoming the next Apple while cameras are panning across thousands of unsold seats. The contrast between the hype and the reality is devastating.
Network debut, and she talks about this Caitlin Clark situation on ESPN with Shanae Aguma-Kay. Let's roll it. Let's listen.
To me, overall, officiating has been a universal issue this year. And that's not the goal of any league, but this is the reality. And when you think about the imperative to call more fouls, we're seeing the highest scoring season ever in WNBA history. That's largely because they're calling more fouls, right? Games are no longer 2 hours, they're 2.5 hours long. So you're seeing that there's an imperative to call more fouls, but there's still a lack of situational awareness or a lack of control of the game by the refs. You can call fouls, but is it dictating how one game is played from the other? Because you can see one game where one is super physical and one where people are dropping 50. There's been a lack of consistency, and this creates a problem in magnifier matchups. And this is a magnifier matchup when you look back at it. Alyssa Thomas, Caitlin Clark, both dominant players, but Alyssa plays on the edge. I know her. And Caitlin sometimes embellishes at times in certain instances. And so when you have a scrum, like you said, there needs to be a vigilance, but also this created.
Sydney Colson, former Fever player, now making her ESPN debut, and she just stepped into a massive controversy. Listen to what she's saying about the officiating situation with Caitlin Clark and Alyssa Thomas. She's talking about embellishment, about how things look different in slow motion versus real time, about how the league is reacting to optics rather than what actually happened on the court. This is someone who played with Caitlin Clark in Indiana, and she's essentially defending Alyssa Thomas while suggesting Caitlin exaggerates contact.
A position where the league is now forced to be reactive. And instead of having a control of not just calling fouls, now the league is reacting and doing something that it rarely does on a non-call and instituting a suspension. And to me, that was unique. But I'll lastly say this, because that largely happened because of the optics. In game flow, if you're watching in game speed, I was watching in game speed, I didn't really notice too much because people hit the ground all the time. But then when narratives are created based off of a freeze frame, that can create a huge problem. And I do think that the league, yes, the league was reacting to the optics of that image.
That was just what Tibbetts was saying, right?
Yeah, like if you walk by me and I'm doing this, but then if you play it faster and you see I was actually doing this, to move my nose, it looked different in freeze frame.
But the bigger picture issue here is that, like, in that situation, if you're watching it in real time, both players who are known to make their issues known got up and kept going.
That was my
so
thing.
that's why I have a problem, because if you're looking at the reaction even to this day, it breaks my heart, because players, even in Alyssa Thomas's caliber, whether you think she did it intentionally or not, she's dealing with a heightened level of vitriol right now based off of what this situation created, and that doesn't sit well with me. If the league could really handle this better in real time and figuring out how we want more points, we want more fouls, but how do we keep an eye on these specific matchups so we can avoid the narratives getting out of our control? I hope that happens moving forward in the future.
Pay attention to the argument she's making here. Colson is saying that in real time, the incident didn't look that bad, that both players got up and kept playing, so it couldn't have been that serious, that the league only suspended Alyssa Thomas because of how the freeze frame looked, not because of what actually happened. She's arguing that the slow-motion replay created a narrative that didn't match reality. But here's the problem with that analysis. The league reviewed the play extensively. They have access to every angle, every speed, every perspective, and they still issued a suspension, which is extremely rare for a non-call. The WNBA doesn't suspend players lightly, especially not for plays the officials missed in real time. So when Colson suggests this was just about optics and narratives getting out of control, she's dismissing the league's own investigation and conclusion. Now we need to talk about what this really reveals, because Sydney Colson's commentary exposes something much bigger than one controversial play. This is about how the WNBA media ecosystem treats Caitlin Clark versus how it treats everyone else. Think about what Colson just did. She went on national television and suggested that Caitlin Clark embellishes contact, not occasionally, not in isolated incidents, but as a pattern of behavior. Those were her exact words. Caitlin sometimes embellishes at times in certain instances. That's not a one-time observation. That's describing a characteristic of how she plays. But here's what makes this significant. Colson played with Caitlin Clark. They were teammates in Indiana. She watched her practice, watched her prepare, watched her compete up close. And now, less than a year after leaving that organization, she's on ESPN characterizing her former teammate as someone who fakes contact to manipulate officials. The lack of loyalty is stunning, but it's also revealing about how some people in the league view Clark. Compare that to how the same media treats other stars. When Angel Reese complains about officiating, it's framed as passion and competitiveness. When Aja Wilson argues calls, it's leadership and intensity. But when Caitlin Clark reacts to getting hit, it's embellishment. The double standard is glaring, and Colson's not done. She goes on to say that Alyssa Thomas plays on the edge, which is such a sanitized way to describe extremely physical, often dirty play. Thomas has a well-documented history of crossing the line. She's been suspended before. She's been fined before. She's known throughout the league as someone who plays right up to and sometimes past the acceptable limits of physicality. But in Colson's analysis, that's just playing on the edge. That's just her style. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark protecting herself from that physicality by selling contact to get officials' attention, that's embellishment. That's creating narratives. That's forcing the league to be reactive instead of in control. The framing is backwards. Colson is essentially arguing that the problem isn't players hitting other players in the face, it's that cameras caught it and people got upset about it. She's saying the issue isn't the violence, it's the visibility of the violence. That's a wild position to take, especially for someone who just played in this league and knows exactly how physical it gets. But here's where it gets even worse. Colson talks about the heightened level of vitriol that Alyssa Thomas is receiving, and she says it breaks her heart. She's genuinely concerned about the criticism Thomas is facing for hitting another player. She's worried about the narratives getting out of control and affecting Thomas's reputation. Where's that same concern for Caitlin Clark? Where's the acknowledgement that Clark has been dealing with a heightened level of vitriol since before she even entered the league? Where's the sympathy for a player who gets physically targeted game after game, then gets accused of faking it when she reacts? The selective empathy is telling. Colson can see how unfair it is when Alyssa Thomas faces criticism for her actions. But she can't see how unfair it is when Caitlin Clark gets hit and then blamed for making it look worse than it was. That's not analysis, that's bias. And this matters because Sydney Colson isn't just some random commentator. She's a former teammate. She's someone who had a front row seat to what Caitlin Clark deals with on a daily basis. She saw how other teams targeted her. She saw how officials let things go. She saw how Clark had to adjust her game to survive the physicality. And her takeaway from all of that is that Caitlin embellishes. This is what Clark is up against. It's not just the opponents who want to rough her up. It's not just the officials who let them do it. It's also the media members and former players who will go on national television and characterize her as dishonest, as manipulative, as someone who creates problems rather than someone dealing with them. Think about the position this puts Caitlin in. She can't complain about the physicality without being called soft. She can't sell contact to get calls without being called a faker. She can't argue with officials without being called entitled. There's no winning move. Every response gets twisted into evidence that she's the problem. Scott Agnes had to know this was coming. When he broke those stories about fever dysfunction, when he reported on the dark side comments, when he exposed the organizational chaos, he knew it would damage his relationship with the team. But that's supposed to be part of the job. Reporters report, even when it makes people uncomfortable. The problem is when former teammates turn into media members and use their platform to undermine players they used to support. What makes this particularly awkward is that Colson's entire argument rests on the idea that things look different in slow motion than in real time. But that's exactly why slow motion exists. That's why leagues review plays frame by frame, because human eyes miss things at full speed. Because real-time perception isn't always accurate, because if you only trust what you saw live, you miss half of what actually happened. The WNBA reviewed that play in slow motion and suspended Alyssa Thomas. They didn't do that because of Twitter narratives or freeze frames creating fake controversy. They did it because when you actually examine what happened, when you see it clearly without the blur of game speed, it was worse than it looked initially. That's not the optics controlling the narrative, that's the evidence revealing the truth. This dynamic is going to continue all season. Caitlin Clark will keep getting hit, officials will keep missing calls, media members will keep suggesting she's exaggerating. And fans will keep getting frustrated that the most talented player in the league has to fight through all of this just to play basketball. The Fever's attendance problems aren't just about coaching or ticket prices. They're about fans watching their favorite player get disrespected repeatedly while people like Sydney Colson go on ESPN and blame her for it. So the question becomes, was this the right take for Sydney Colson to make on her network debut? Because she just told every Caitlin Clark fan that their concerns don't matter, that what they're seeing isn't real, that the player they support is faking it for attention. That's not analysis, that's alienation. And for someone trying to build a media career, alienating the largest fan base in women's basketball seems like a spectacularly bad strategy. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the goal isn't to be fair, it's to fit in with the established narrative. And the established narrative is that Caitlin Clark is the problem, not the solution. Let me know what you think in the comments.